بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. I couldn't join on my laptop, so I would not be sharing the screen. Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are on the last chapter of Hajj. As we mentioned last week, this is our last chapter, and today will be the last lesson finishing off things to do about Hajj. So we mentioned the arkan. First of all, we mentioned what makes Hajj to be wajib, what makes Hajj to be wajib on a person. We said Islam, sanity and reaching puberty. This makes someone to be mukallaf. And then we continue by saying that the person must be free, the way to Mecca must be safe, and finally having the ability. And so having the ability meaning having sufficient funds for yourself throughout the journey, going and coming back. And also having enough wealth or money for your family that you left at home. So you shouldn't go to Hajj whilst you don't even know your family what they're going to be fed. And we mentioned for women must also have a mahram or a group of women that could be trusted. And then we explained about the intervals of Hajj. We said the haram, standing in Arafah, doing the tawaf al-ifada, doing sa'i, shaving, and finally following the sequence. And the intervals of Umrah, they are similar to Hajj except standing in Arafah. So for Hajj, there is no standing in Arafah, but the rest are the same. And then the wajibat. We said the wajibat are different from arkan. The arkan, if you miss the rukun, your Hajj or Umrah will not be valid unless you do them. And we mentioned for wuquf in Arafah, standing in Arafah, once you miss that, you cannot perform it. You have to make it up the year after, because that is the first rukun of Hajj. The second rukun of Hajj. If you miss it, that means everything else. Even if you do tawaf, you shave, you do everything else, but you missed wuquf in Arafah, your whole Hajj will be incomplete. You have to redo the Hajj again. So the wajibat are: one must enter an ihram at the proper site, so the miqat, where you should be doing the so the different areas where you put the ihram on. Staying the night in Muzdalifah, stoning the 3 jamarat, staying the night following the Eid at Mina, and tawaf al-wada'. And we mentioned things that are haram. So for men wearing seen garment, men covering their head, so you cannot wear a hat in the Hajj. For women, would not be allowed to cover their faces, combing hair, shaving hair or plucking it, trimming nails, applying perfume, killing a game animal, performing nikah, having sexual intercourse, sexual foreplay, and other than intercourse. So all of these are haram for someone to do them. So if someone missed a wajib or someone did something haram, they must do a kafara. So if you miss a wajib, your Hajj is still valid, but you need to give kafara. So let's look at the kafara. With kafara, there's different types of kafara. And these kafara, what are they given for? So the first one, it is called ظم الترتيب والتقدير. ظم الترتيب والتقدير. So there's two terms here. There's التقدير, so there's a tartib and taqdir. What does this mean? At-tartib, it means you must follow the sequence of these things. So meaning that you must do this. If you can't, then you move to the second. If you can't, you move to the third. Okay, this is called at-tartib. So if you remember in Sawm, we said if someone had intercourse with their wife whilst fasting in Ramadan, then the first thing they have to do is to free a slave. If they can't, then they move on to fast for 60 days, if for 2 months. If they can't, then they move on to feeding 60 people. So here, a tartib, it means, so if there's certain act which we're going to mention them, inshallah, if you do them, that means the first thing you need to do is this, and then if you can't, then you move this. If you can't, you move to the other one. The opposite of tartib is takhyir, which is the second different type of dam. We're going to mention it later on. But at-takhyir means you have an option. You have a list of things, you choose whatever you want. You don't have to follow the order. Even if you can't do this, it doesn't matter. You can just do the other one. And then we have taqdeer. Taqdeer is predetermined. Okay, there's a predetermined amount, you can't change it. That's it. This is this, you can't change that. The opposite of that is ta'deel. Okay, ta'deel means that you don't have to give that specific, you can give something in return instead of this. Okay, like for example, slaughtering, or give the value of the animal. So if you can't slaughter, you give the value. Okay, so you have an option. Or if you can't do this, you do something else, which is still part of the same thing. We'll look at the example later on. So the dam that we're talking now is dam tartib wa taqdeer. It is fixed. Okay, it's is fixed, and it has to be in order. So let's look at those. What are they? First of all, before we mention what you need to, let's mention what you need to do. The first one must slaughter a sheep and distribute meat to the poor in the haram. So there are certain acts if you do, then the expiation is you must slaughter a sheep, and the meat of that sheep must be distributed in the haram. You cannot take it away back or send money. Say, oh, said it's too expensive, let me send money back home and do it back home. No, you're not allowed to do that. It has to be in the haram. So slaughter a sheep and distribute the meat inside the haram. However, if someone cannot do that, this is the first thing you have to do. Unless if you can't do it, then you move on to the second option, which is to fast 3 days in the haram. So in whilst doing Hajj. Okay, so you do the 3 days in Hajj. So obviously before, not during Arafah, so before that. And then you fast 3 in the haram, and then you fast 7 days when you go back home, so that it is 10 days in total. So if someone could not slaughter a sheep, they didn't have enough sufficient funds to do so, they didn't have money. But if you did have money for you to purchase the sheep and slaughter it, then you must do that. You must slaughter a sheep. But you didn't have sufficient funds, you couldn't do that, then you must fast 10 days. However, these 10 days, you don't fast them in the haram. You only fast 3 days in Mecca during Hajj season, and then the remaining 7 days, you fast them at home. For example, someone didn't fast in the Hajj. Okay, if someone didn't fast these 3 days in Hajj, for example, they didn't know, or they forgot, or they didn't know but they didn't do it because they're too busy, or for any reason they failed to do that, they did not fast these 3 days in the Hajj, doesn't mean that they don't have to do them anymore. You still have to do them. You do all the 10 days at home. However, you separate these days. So you fast 3 days fast. Okay, you fast the 3 days, and you wait for 4 days, and you estimate how long does it take from Mecca to your house. So in our time that we live in is only a day, or maximum 2 days if someone is going for transit. Okay, so mainly 1 to 2 days. So you separate between the fast. This is only for those who did not fast the 3 days in the haram, in Hajj. So once they go back home, okay, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, ثلاثة في الحج وسبعة إذا رجعتم تلك عشرة كاملة. So you fast 3 days in Hajj. But if someone failed to fast these 3 days during Hajj, and they went home without fasting them in Hajj, they still have to fast these 3 days. However, they must separate the 3 days from the 10 days. You cannot fast the 10 days together. So you fast 3 days, wait for 4 days, and in plus how many days it takes from Mecca to the country or the city you live in. So as I mentioned, in our time, we just say 1 to 2 days. Okay, and then you fast the remaining 7 days, completing the 10 days. Okay. Okay. So as I mentioned, this type of type of expiation must be fast. The first one should be slaughtering, and then if you can't slaughter, you fast for 10 days. Okay, so who should give this type of blood? Okay, who must give this type of blood or this type of expiation? Is someone who performed Hajj, which is known as Hajj Qiran or Hajj Tamattu'. First of all, what is Hajj Tamattu' and what is Hajj Qiran? Hajj, there's three types of niyyah. We mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, not the beginning of the lesson, but at the beginning of the chapter of Hajj, that there's three types of Hajj. There's Hajj Ifrad. This is when you're putting the niyyah, when you're intending to do the Hajj, you intend to do one of these three types of Hajj. The first one is called Ifrad. Second is called Tamattu'. The third is Qiran. Ifrad, Hajj Ifrad, is when you perform Hajj by itself. You don't perform Umrah. Okay, Hajj Ifrad, you don't perform Umrah, you only perform the Hajj. So this is called Ifrad. Like Fard, you're singling out the Hajj. And then we have Tamattu'. What is Tamattu'? Hajj Tamattu' is when you perform Hajj and Umrah, however, you separate the two. So what you need to do is during the Hajj season, you put the intention of performing Umrah and Hajj Tamattu'an. So what you need to do is before you pass the miqat, you put your intention there. You go to Mecca, you do the tawaf al-Ifada. After that, you do sa'i. Once you perform the sa'i, you cut your hair. Okay, so here it would not be wise to shave it off because you wouldn't have enough hair to shave it after for doing Hajj. So you cut your hair. After cutting your hair, you remove the ihram. You remove your ihram, and now you are free. You're not in the state of ihram anymore. If you can do everything else that, if you want to apply perfume, have a shower, to cut your hair, you want to get married, you want to do everything else that was made haram at the time of Hajj, you will be allowed to perform them. Once that is done, whilst in Mecca, on the 8th of the Hijjah, you put the ihram again. Okay, so you put the ihram again, so that's now you're without going outside Mecca for the miqat. You just do the ihram while you are, you put them on, and then you go, you perform Hajj as usual. This is called Tamattu'. So Tamattu', performing Hajj and Umrah together. However, you start with Umrah and you remove the ihram and you put them on for Hajj separate. As for the Qiran, okay, as for the Hajj Qiran is for again doing Hajj and Umrah together, both of them together with one intention. So you wait, you put on the miqat, you put ihram on, and you perform your Hajj as normal, and the tawaf that you do for Hajj will be the same tawaf that you'll be doing for Umrah, and the Safa and Marwa that you do for Hajj will be the same for Umrah. You don't perform them separately. So here you'll be doing Hajj and Umrah together in one go. So if someone performed Umrah, which is the performed Hajj Tamattu' or Qiran, they have to slaughter a sheep. If they cannot afford that, then they fast for 10 days, obviously 3 in Hajj and remaining when they go back. As I mentioned last time, this is not so someone said, oh, I have to pay. No, to perform Hajj and Hajj Tamattu' and Qiran, this is allowed. Okay, it is allowed for you to do that. Even if you're going to give the hadi, it doesn't mean that you're doing something haram. Okay, it doesn't mean you're doing something haram. You can still perform this type of Hajj. Although that you have to give hadi, this is something extra ibadah that you're doing. Because for Hajj Tamattu', you're missing the intention of Hajj in the miqat, because you do your intention in haram without going to the miqat. And here for Hajj Qiran, you're performing 2 acts at the same time. In this case, you have to give something extra, which is the hadi. Because the one who doing ifrad, they are doing hajj by itself, and then later on, after the hajj, they finish the hajj, they can perform their umrah whenever they want. Also, someone who did not stand in Arafah. So someone who did not stand in Arafah, they also have to slaughter, and also what they have to do, come back next year and perform the hajj again. Okay, so if they did come for hajj, this person traveled all the way to come and perform hajj. However, they did not stand in the Arafah. So this person must also slaughter. If they cannot slaughter, then they fast for 10 days, as we mentioned, and they have to come back next year to perform the hajj again. Also, if someone missed stoning at the stoning site of Mina on the 3 days after the Eid, the time for which ends at sunset on the 3rd day if one does not leave early. So with Mina, as we mentioned, is 3 days. So you do the Eid, the day of Eid, and then we have the 3 days of Mina. These 3 days, you can have an option of only doing 2, not 3. You can have an option of doing 2 instead of 3 days. However, if you do choose to do 2 days, you must leave Mina before sunset. Okay, you must leave Mina before sunset on the 2nd day, on the 12th of the Hijjah. If on the 12th of the Hijjah, after sunset, you're still in Mina, you're not allowed, you have to perform the 3rd day as well. But if after sunset you decided not to do the 3rd day and sunset enters, you must slaughter as well. Okay. To miss all the 3 nights at Mina after the day of Eid, though if one misses a single night, one distribute 509 grams of wheat to the poor of Haram, and if 2 nights, then double this amount. For example, someone went there and they missed 1 day. So for example, they missed on the 11th, they went to the 12th. Okay, so that day they missed, they must pay 509 grams, which is 1 mud of wheat to the poor people of Mecca. However, if they missed the whole night, all the 3 nights, on the day of Eid, they decided to go back. Okay, once they finished Eid, they went to Jamarat and they did the stoning, and they decided, okay, I'm not gonna do it again. I'm just gonna go back. They must slaughter a sheep and distribute it to the people of Mecca. Okay, to miss spending the night of Muzdalifah. Okay, Muzdalifah is wajib. So here, in other words, to summarize it, this whole thing, if someone missed a wajib, okay, if someone missed a wajib of Hajj, then they must perform. So they must, the first thing they have to do is slaughter, and if they can't slaughter, then they have to fast the 10 days, as we mentioned. So the wajibat, which is included the Muzdalifah, include entering ihram at the miqat, or performing tawaf al-wada'. So if someone missed a wajib amongst the wajibat of Hajj, they must give this type of fidya. Means the first thing they have to do is slaughter. If they can't afford slaughtering, then they move on to the second one, which is fasting for 10 days. But if someone has sufficient funds to slaughter, they cannot move on to the second one until they slaughter. The second type of dam is called dam al-Takhayir wa al-Taqdir. Okay, dam al-Takhayir wa al-Taqdir. This type of blood, or this type of expiation, is optional. Which one you choose? Okay, not optional means you have to do it. However, you have an option. So you can either choose between slaughtering or fasting. So for these things, that if you do them, even if you have sufficient funds, okay, even if you have sufficient funds to slaughter, and you decided not to slaughter, you will be also you decided to fast. Or the third option is to give 2 kilograms of wheat to 6 people in the haram. Okay, so each person you give them 2 kgs. So you have 3 options: fast, slaughtering, or giving food. Even if you have enough sufficient funds to fast or to give food, or to slaughter, you're still able to fast. So who has to do this? If someone did something haram, we mentioned things that are haram, for example, cutting your hair, trimming the nails, wearing the garment for women to cover their faces, using oil or perfume, having sexual, not sexual intercourse, having having foreplay, not sexual intercourse, but foreplay, or having sexual intercourse for the second time, not the first time. We'll cover later on, because if someone, for example, in the Hajj, they had sexual intercourse, there's a different type of dam, or there's a different type of expiation they have to do. But if someone did that expiation, they performed sexual intercourse again, then they have an option of these three things: either slaughter, fasting, or feeding 6 people 2 kgs each. Or having foreplay, as I mentioned, no sexual intercourse, or someone has sexual intercourse after partial release from ihram. I think I mentioned this last week. Coming out of ihram, there's 2 types of ways of coming ihram. There's partial coming away from ihram, and there's full coming out from ihram. The partial one, if someone, for example, performed, they did stoning. So there's 3 things: stoning, cutting the hair, and tawaf. If they perform 2 of these things, that means they have partially come out from ihram. For example, on the day of Eid, okay, someone did tawaf and sa'i, and they cut their hair. That means they have partially come out of ihram. Or they did tawaf and they did the stoning, then they have partially come out from ihram as well. So in this case, once you partially come out of ihram, you will be allowed to do everything else except having sexual intercourse, getting married, and foreplay. These are still not allowed during partial coming out of ihram. And once you perform everything else that we mentioned, for like going for Mina and all of that, then you have come out of ihram completely. You'll be allowed to do everything else. So if someone did something that it is haram, if someone did something haram in Hajj, they have an option of either slaughtering a sheep and distributing the meat, or fasting for 10 days. The same way we mentioned 3 in Hajj and 7 back home, going back home. And the final one is to give 2 kilograms approximately to 6 people in the haram. However, except sexual intercourse. So if someone does anything haram in Hajj, they do these things except for sexual intercourse, unless the sexual intercourse was done once they have partially come out from the haram, which means they have completed 2 out of 3 things. Okay, or they did the second time, they have sexual intercourse the second time. The third type of dam is called 𝗚 𝗪 an expiation that it must follow the certain order, that you have to do 1. If you can't, you go to 2nd. If you can't, the 3rd. And also this ta'dil means the substitute. You can give a substitute of the thing that you have to do. When do you give this type of dam? Is one being prevented by another from completing all the intercourse of Hajj or Umrah, in which case one must release oneself from ihram. Okay, there is someone stopped you. For example, you arrived in Hajj, and then you are told, oh, your passport is expired, you can't come, you have to go back. So in that case, you have to follow this order. One must slaughter a sheep and distribute the meat to the poor in the haram. If you can't, then you fast 3 days, similar to what we mentioned previously. Okay, so this is for someone who could not perform Hajj. However, if someone did not come to Hajj, they wanted to, and they were stopped at the airport before even boarding the plane, and they come back, they just do the hadi in their town, not in Hajj. If someone spoiled their Hajj because of doing intercourse, okay, if someone had intercourse in Hajj, then they have to slaughter a camel. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is slaughter a camel. If they can't, then they go to a cow. If it's not possible, they couldn't slaughter a cow, then they slaughter a sheep. And if they cannot, then they estimate the price of a camel, see how much food you can buy. Then you buy the food and distribute it to the people of Haram. However, if someone cannot do that, then you fast for, you calculate, for example, a camel, how much a camel weighs. Let's say 200 grams, 200, 300 kilograms approximately. So you divide that 200 kilograms, you divide it by 509 grams. That will be approximately 100 days. So you have to fast for 100 days. Okay. And this fasting could be done anywhere. Okay. Not specifically in Hajj, you can do it. You can perform this type of fasting anywhere. So if someone had sexual intercourse, they destroyed their Hajj. Okay, they have destroyed their Hajj. Then the first thing they have to do is slaughter a camel. If they can't slaughter a camel, they move on to the second option, which is to slaughter a cow. If that's not possible, you slaughter 7 sheep. If that's not possible, you estimate how much does a cow cost and distribute the food in on behalf of the money to the poor people of Haram. If that's not possible, for example, there's no animals at all, or you have no money at all to fast, so then you estimate how much does a cow cost. How much does a cow weigh? And I said approximately, let's say, 200 to 300 kilograms. Okay, and you fast according to, so you divide that to 500 grams. That's 1 mud, and then you fast according to that. And you must fast immediately without any excuse, without any delay, sorry. And then we have 𝗚 𝗪 So what we mentioned before, you cannot just go straight to fasting. Fasting is the last resort. If you can't do any of, so you have to follow the order that I have mentioned. If you can't do those, that's when you go to fasting. And then the final type of dam is called 𝗚 𝗪 this is which is not optional, but you have a choice which one to do. So, for example, this is for if someone killed a game animal, hunting. While someone was in ihram, they went hunting. This person must, they have an option of slaughtering a domestic animal that is like the wild animal that was killed. So they went hunting. So obviously, if, for example, they killed a bull, then they have to slaughter a cow on that, because it's the similar animal. Or, for example, they hunted a gazelle. The similar to a gazelle will be a sheep or a goat. Okay, or they killed a giraffe. Okay, so the equivalent of giraffe will be a camel. So this is what they have to do. So whatever they've killed, then they slaughter a similar animal. They also have an option to distribute funds to the poor, which is similar value to that. So as I mentioned, same order. So if you killed a gazelle, then you weigh how much, for example, will cost. You have to give fidya based on that. Or to buy food equal to the animal's value and distribute as charity. Or to fast 1 day for each of 509 grams, similar to what we mentioned already. Okay, so the previous one, if someone had sexual intercourse, so they destroyed the Hajj, what we mentioned that they have to do, okay, is similar here. However, here in this case, it is optional which one you choose. The first one was tartib, that means you have to follow that order. The fasting was last resort. Here, you have an option whichever you want to do. You want to slaughter an animal, or you want to distribute funds, or you want to give money, food, or you want to fast. You have an option, whichever you want to do. Also, destroying a tree in the haram, where if it is larger in relation to other trees of its kind, one slaughters and distributes a cow. If it's small, one distributes sheep. So it depends which one you have. If you cut a bigger tree, then you have to give something bigger. But if it's something small, then you give something small. Okay, so with hadi, with slaughtering and giving for the poor, it has to be inside the haram. You cannot be outside the haram. However, for fasting, you can do it whatever you want. And finally, this is all to do with Hajj, alhamdulillah. So we covered, to summarize, let me summarize the chapter of expiation. So expiation are 4 types. The first one is done with if someone did something, they missed a wajib. Okay, if someone, they missed a wajib amongst the wajibat of Hajj, for example, they didn't go to Muzdalifah, or they didn't spend the night in Mina, or they missed the final night, or they missed the tawaf al-wada. If someone did that, then they must fast, they must slaughter a sheep and distribute to the poor. If they cannot afford to do that, then that's when they can go to fasting. You fast 3 days in Hajj and 7 days when you go back. And they must be, if someone didn't do it in Hajj, the 3 days, they must do it at home still. However, they separate between the 3 days and the 7 days to make them complete 10. So this is for someone who missed a wajib. So the first option, they have to slaughter. If they have funds for slaughtering, they are not allowed to fast. They have to slaughter. If they don't have the funding and they are unable to slaughter, then they have to go to second option, which is fasting. And then, so this is for someone who missed a wajib, or they performed Umrah, which is Hajj Tamattu or Hajj Qiran. And then we have Takhyir, when it's an optional. You have an option which one to choose between fasting 10 days and slaughtering. You have an option, and this is for someone who did something haram, whether they put perfume on, or they cut their hair was in the haram, or they had foreplay or sexual intercourse after the partial, not sexual intercourse in Hajj, because this has different dam, as we explained it later on. And then there's tartib, if someone did not perform Hajj completely. Okay, they did not perform Hajj completely. They were stopped. Something prevented them from performing the Hajj. So they have to fast, slaughter a sheep and distribute to the poor of the haram. This is the first option they have to do. If they can't, then fast 3 days, as we have mentioned previously. And the second thing, if someone had sexual intercourse, whilst in the state of ihram, not partial, like full ihram, if you're in the full ihram and someone performs sexual intercourse, then they have to slaughter a camel. If they can't, then a cow. If they can't, then they go to the sheep. And this must be in this order. A cow, if they have sufficient funds to buy a camel, they have to slaughter a camel. If they can't, then they move on to the cow, then the 7 sheep. If you can't, then you estimate how much does a camel cost. For example, it's very difficult, there's no camels around. Then you ask people normally how much do they sell camels. You distribute food to the people, the poor people of the haram. If that's not possible, for example, you don't have funds to buy a camel, you don't have funds to buy 7 sheep, then a camel, you estimate how much does a camel weigh, and then you fast for each 500 grams, you fast 1 day. So you divide it by 2, and you just add a day or so. And they say, for example, a camel weighs, let's say 200 and a bit. So you calculated, and 500 grams, 509 grams, and then there was extra, for example, 200 grams. So you fasted each 509 grams for one day, for let's say 100 days, and then there was like 250 grams extra. So for those 250 grams, you also have to fast a day for them. Okay, so normally you calculate one mud, which is around 500 grams, okay, approximately. So you fast for those days, and then if there's like 100 grams, 200 grams extra, you also have to fast one day for that. And the final type of blood, which is option, we choose an option if someone went for hunting. So if they did go for hunting, then similar to what we mentioned before. However, you have an option. If you're able to fast, then just fast. But if you want, you can buy a camel. If you want to buy sheep, whatever, you have an option. Also, if someone destroyed the trees in the haram, this is for everyone. Okay, you're not allowed to cut the trees of haram. If someone did that, then they have to slaughter a sheep if the tree is small. If the tree is bigger, then they slaughter a cow. And finally, once someone did all of that, then it is sunnah to visit the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, if someone didn't do that, the Hajj will still be valid. Okay, so the Hajj will still be valid even if someone did not go to Medina. However, you miss a chance of you went all that journey, so you go to Medina. And Medina you can visit anytime. It could be before Hajj, it could be after Hajj. It doesn't matter when you choose to go. For example, if someone went to Medina already and they only had a few period of time to go Hajj and Umrah, then they can just go. Like this year, some people who went with the lowest package, they were only allowed to go to not only allowed, but that package was only for Mecca. It did not take them to Medina. If they didn't have sufficient funds to go to Medina, it's fine. They can come back. And finally, the Sheikh ended the book by making dua. He said, نسأل الله الكريم بجاه نبيه الوسيم أن يخرجني من الدنيا مسلما ووالدي وأحبائي ومن إلي ينتمى وأن يغفر لي ولهم مقحمات ولمما وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد بن عبد الله بن عبد المطلب بن هاشم ابن عبد مناف رسول الله إلى كافة الخلق رسول الملاحم حبيب الله الفاتح الخاتم وآله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. So the dua says, we ask Almighty Allah through the dignity of His graceful Prophet that He takes me, my parents, my beloved ones, and those who are related to me from this world as Muslims. So He asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take us all away from when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does take us away from this world, then He takes us as Muslim. And He forgives us, He forgives me and them for our recklessness and weakness. So again, the Shaykh continues making dua so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives him and the whole ummah and the people that he mentioned and weakness. Finally, he finished by sending salutation to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim ibn Abdul Manaf, the messenger of Allah to the entire creation, the warrior prophet, the beloved of Allah, the conqueror and the seal, and peace be upon his entire family and all his companions. Finally, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of all the worlds. And he finished by saying, تم بعون الله تعالى متن سفينة النجاة. So the text of Safinat al-Najā is complete with the help of Allah, the Exalted. Alhamdulillah, we have come to the end of the book. So we started from, first of all, mentioning the pillars of Islam, the pillars of faith, and then mentioning the wajib, haram, sunnah, mubah, and makruh. And then we entered the chapter of tahara. Once we complete the chapter of tahara, we entered the second pillar of Islam, which was as-salah. Then we move on to the zakah, which is the third pillar, and then we move on to the fourth pillar, which is as-sawm. And alhamdulillah, today we have finally completed the fifth pillar and the last pillar of Islam, which is the Hajj. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit us from what we have studied. And inshallah, don't forget us from your du'as, inshallah. Let's look at the questions. Okay, if one violates more than one wajibat, can he combine them into one, or he needs to do separate for each violation? You need to do separate for each violation, because each wajib is different. Okay, you need to expiate for each one of them. Okay, so if there's no any further questions, we will end it here, inshallah. As I mentioned, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit us and use this knowledge. So all that we studied, these are the things that you need in your life. Okay, especially when it comes to salah and soul, because these mostly everyone do it. As for zakah, is mainly if you have wealth, okay, and hajj for those who are able to do. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to also give us the ability to go for hajj and umrah, and make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy in the future, because it's becoming very difficult and becoming expensive each year. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable everyone to go for hajj and to benefit us from everything that we have said. And if there's any shortcomings, we ask for your forgiveness, inshallah, and everything. Everything that was correct is the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we made the mistakes, we are human beings, we do make mistakes, inshallah. And if anyone saw any mistakes in the videos, please, inshallah, do let us know, because we are human beings, we make mistakes. So do let us know if there are any mistakes, inshallah. And finally, don't forget us in your du'as, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, hopefully have the opportunity to teach you all again, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.